Lebanon, a country once called the Switzerland of the Middle East. It boasted one of the strongest banking sectors in the Arab world, a culture that pulsed with life, and a proud, highly educated population. But today, that country is collapsing. Its currency has lost more than 98% of its value. Its banks are frozen. Poverty has tripled in just a few short years, and the government is, for all intents and purposes, completely bankrupt. So how did a nation once celebrated for its prosperity and resilience become the world's next major financial crisis? This is the story of how Lebanon's economy completely fell apart and what it means for emerging markets everywhere. Let's rewind to the 1960s and 70s. Lebanon was a true financial hub. Beirut was a playground for international investors, tourists, and bankers. The Lebanese pound was stable, and a steady stream of deposits flowed in from all across the Middle East. Even after a brutal 15-year civil war, the Lebanese people showed incredible resilience and rebuilt their nation, relying on remittances from abroad, a booming tourism industry, and strict banking secrecy laws that attracted foreign capital. By the 2000s, it really looked like a remarkable comeback story. But beneath the surface of this recovery was a fragile illusion, a house of cards that was destined to destroy the entire economy. You see, Lebanon's economy wasn't built on a solid foundation of production or exports. It was built on borrowing. The government, through its central bank, offered absurdly high interest rates to attract deposits, not just from Lebanese citizens, but from the vast diaspora living abroad. These deposits were then used to fund government spending, public sector salaries, and a massive import bill. It was a perfectly circular system. People would deposit their hard-earned dollars, the banks would lend that money to the government, and the government would pay back the interest on those loans using, you guessed it, new deposits. Economists had a name for this system. They called it what it was, a Ponzi scheme, but on a national scale. And just like any Ponzi scheme, it worked perfectly as long as confidence remained high and new money kept flowing in. But the moment that confidence slipped, the entire structure began to teeter on the edge of collapse. By 2019, the cracks were impossible to ignore. The government's debt had ballooned to an astronomical 170% of its GDP. One of the highest debt-to-GDP ratios in the entire world. The country was importing almost everything it consumed, from food to fuel, while exporting next to nothing. The foreign currency reserves that propped up this system started drying up at an alarming rate. The central bank tried desperately to defend the currency's peg, which was fixed at £1,500 to the US dollar, but the cost was becoming unbearable. Then came the trigger. In October 2019, mass protests erupted across the country. Millions of people took to the streets, fed up with decades of corruption, political mismanagement, and a crumbling quality of life. In that moment, confidence vanished overnight. Terrified depositors rushed to withdraw their money, only to find that the banks had locked their doors. And that was the moment Lebanon's economy officially fell off the cliff. Within months, the Lebanese pound went into freefall on the black market. First, it plunged to £3,000 per dollar, then 10,000, then 50,000, and eventually over 100,000. People's entire life savings, carefully accumulated over decades, evaporated into thin air. A monthly salary once worth $1,000 suddenly became worth less than $20. Shops began pricing their goods in dollars because the local currency had become practically meaningless. The consequences were catastrophic. The national power grid failed, plunging the country into darkness for up to 23 hours a day. Hospitals ran out of basic medicine. Supermarket shelves went empty. Middle-class families who had once lived comfortably were thrust into poverty almost overnight. It was, according to the World Bank, one of the most severe financial crises in modern history. And for the first time, Lebanon's own people began fleeing the country in record numbers, not because of war, but because of economic despair. Just when it seemed things couldn't possibly get worse, they did. On August 4, 2020, a colossal explosion ripped through the port of Beirut. It was caused by 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate that had been improperly stored for years, a testament to the state's gross negligence. The blast killed more than 200 people, injured thousands, and destroyed a third of the capital city. The damage was estimated at over $15 billion, money that Lebanon simply did not have. That single horrific moment symbolized everything that was wrong with the system: endemic corruption, criminal negligence, and a complete collapse of governance. It wasn't just a physical explosion, it was the economic detonation of a nation that was already crumbling from within. Now, you might be asking yourself, why does the fall of a small country like Lebanon matter on a global scale? It matters because it's a terrifying warning sign for every small, over-leveraged economy in the developing world. Lebanon's crisis wasn't unique. It was just an extreme example of common vulnerabilities. The country borrowed heavily in a foreign currency it didn't control. It over-relied on volatile sources of income like remittances and tourism. It subsidized imports it couldn't afford, creating a false sense of prosperity. And when the flow of foreign money stopped, the entire structure came crashing down. Today, dozens of other nations, from Egypt to Ghana to Sri Lanka, are facing disturbingly similar pressures: high debt, weak exports, and shrinking currency reserves. Lebanon just happened to be the first one to hit the wall. The human toll of this collapse is devastating. Over 80% of the Lebanese population now lives below the poverty line. Access to electricity is a luxury, available for only a few hours a day. The healthcare system is in a state of crisis, and the country has witnessed a mass exodus of its most talented teachers, doctors, and professionals. Yet, through all this suffering, the political elites who orchestrated this disaster remain largely untouched, protected by the very same sectarian system that caused the collapse in the first place. For ordinary Lebanese people, it feels like they are living in a failed state that still ridiculously calls itself a democracy. The real tragedy is not that Lebanon fell, it's that it didn't have to. The country's story offers some crystal-clear lessons for the world. First, don't build your economy on a mountain of debt. Using short-term borrowing to fund long-term consumption always ends in collapse. Second, fix corruption before it becomes terminal. Once public trust erodes, no amount of foreign aid can restore confidence in the system. Third, diversify your economy. Tourism and remittances are great, but they are not a substitute for real growth, which comes from production, innovation, and exports. And finally, transparency is power. When governments hide the true state of their finances, people lose faith. And when faith dies, so does the currency. Recovery is possible for Lebanon, but it won't be easy. It requires deep, painful political reform, a complete restructuring of the banking sector, and the implementation of a realistic currency system that reflects actual economic value. The country's greatest resource has always been its people, its brilliant engineers, doctors, artists, and entrepreneurs. If they can be brought back with the promise of real opportunity and a government they can trust, the nation could rebuild. But without fundamental, structural change, Lebanon risks becoming a permanent warning label for the developing world. Lebanon's story isn't just about economics. It's about what happens when leadership fails its people, and when ordinary citizens are forced to pay the price for decades of greed and mismanagement. It's a powerful reminder that no nation is too small to collapse, and no society is too resilient to break.